Hey everybody, thanks for joining us today. This is for our Earth Day events for the City of Ottawa. I'm joined today by Emma Langham, who's our communications lead for the climate change portfolio. And then I've also got Mike Banks here, who's part of the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa, and he'll be leading the presentation that we're going to be going through today. I'm going to start with a couple of general remarks about electric vehicles, and then Mike, our kind of expert in this field, is going to go through his presentation explaining kind of the ins and outs of electric vehicles as a whole. Um, so electric vehicles form a really important part of the Cities of Ottawa's energy evolution strategy, which is the goal to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050. That goal itself has electric vehicles as the number one emission reduction approach for the city to take to reduce emissions to meet those goals. And it's something that we focus on quite heavily as part of our energy evolution goals to reduce emissions. Some of the things we've done recently in order to support that adoption of electric vehicles, we've recently installed 24 charging stations in 12 locations around urban Ottawa. We've done a consultation through Engage Ottawa around some future plans for installations, particularly in areas where there are equity concerns. We are looking to electrify the City of Ottawa's public transportation fleets, starting with 450 electric buses by 2027. We've recently run an electric vehicle ice resurfacer at one of our city ice rinks as a pilot to figure out how it all works. We're slowly electrifying the city's light duty fleets, and future goals are to electrify the entire fleet as well. And when we're also working quite heavily with our community partners, such as the Electric Vehicle Council, as part of our ongoing work to get education going in the community. And they're also looking to get some test drive events going forward this year as well, as part of a recent opportunity we've been involved with. So with that, I will pass it off to Mike Banks, who will go through a presentation about everything you need to know about electric vehicles. So take it away, Mike.
All right, thanks a lot, Mitchell. So for the agenda tonight, what we'll be covering is who is EVCO, what are we doing, who are we, the types of zero emission vehicles or EVs, ZEVs even, differences between ICE and EV, ICE being internal combustion engine, and then EV, electric vehicles. Some of the advantages that EVs have over their ICE cousins. Fueling, charging at home, on the road, the different plug types, and we'll go through a few of the available vehicles that are on the market today. If I've done a good job in selling you on EVs, or at least the concept anyway, you'll be able to see what's around and what you might be able to get at some point. And all right, next slide here. So the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa, we've been around since 1982. We are a nonprofit group of volunteers, and we are passionate about reducing greenhouse gas emissions as much as possible. And to do that, we feel that electrifying the transportation system is probably one of the fastest and easiest ways. It's a low-hanging fruit. 30% of our emissions come from vehicles burning fossil fuels. And so the faster we electrify those, the better it is for everybody. We've partnered with the City of Ottawa. We've partnered with EnviroCenter and a few other organizations. You may have noticed there are 4 electric buses currently on the roads, and EVCO played a role in getting those on the road. And there are more coming, as Mitchell just alluded to. If you want to check us out, our website is evco.ca. And we're always looking for volunteers to do test drives, to do rides. We have a lot of knowledge. So if you're curious about EVs, definitely give us a shout. We also have a presence on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. All right, types of ZEVs. So you might have heard the term ZEV at some point. There's a lot of information when they talk about zero emission vehicles. There's a lot of stuff out there. The industry has this term that they've been floating around for many years now called ZEV. And one of the main ZEVs that people like to talk about, especially from the oil and gas industry and the automotive industry, are hydrogen fuel cell. And what they like to say is that they're zero tailpipe emissions, right? Which is true. Hydrogen fuel cell cars do not pollute at the tailpipe. Unfortunately, creating the hydrogen is problematic. Currently, the way the hydrogen is produced on Earth is through steam reforming methane, which is natural gas, right? It's a hydrocarbon. And so for every H that you get, every hydrogen molecule you get two CO2s, which is obviously not the greatest thing for climate change purposes. So we feel that hydrogen fuel cell cars for light vehicles, not the most practical idea. There's a bunch of other reasons why hydrogen's not a great solution. They're not very efficient as far as energy into energy being used, well to wheel kind of thing. They're not truly zero emissions, as I mentioned. Creating the hydrogen pollutes quite a bit. Yes, you can electrolyze water. However, that's not a large scale production right now, and it's very difficult to do and requires a lot of energy. So it's just not a very practical thing. Yes, there currently is a hydrogen economy. Hydrogen is a very useful element and resource. And it can be used in the green economy for sure, for things like creating steel, for example, perhaps heavy shipping. But as far as light vehicles go, it's not really a practical solution. There are hydrogen cars on the market. They are extremely expensive. And if you think the price of gas is expensive, you should check out the price of hydrogen. It's nuts. So we don't see that as a practical ZEV option. Conventional hybrids, those have been around for 20 years. I remember when the first Prius came out, I was in high school. Those are not considered to be electric vehicles. They're gas vehicles with an electric motor to help them, but they burn gas basically from the time you turn them on until you turn them off to go home. So they're gas vehicles basically, and they're not considered EVs. There is a type of hybrid that is considered an EV, and that's a plug-in hybrid. So plug-in hybrid's a little bit different. I mentioned the Prius before, and everyone's sort of familiar with the weird-looking Prius. Well, Toyota came out with what they call the Prius Prime, which has a plug, so you can plug it in. These vehicles typically have a pure electric range of between 20 and 90 kilometers. Most of them are around 50 kilometers. A good example of that is the Pacifica Hybrid. I used to own one. It's the only electrified minivan on the market. So if you're in the market for a minivan and you want to buy as little gas as possible, then the Pacifica is basically your only option. And what those get you is you can do most of your daily needs on electric only, right? Most people drive less than 50 kilometers a day. The average commute is about 40 kilometers a day in Canada, which is well within the range of a typical plug-in hybrid. So they do have the ability to run electric only, and then there is the ICE engine, the internal combustion engine, as a backup to extend your range. So if you go on a road trip, then it just behaves like a normal hybrid, a normal gas car. So a lot of people find these very appealing, and they're great. My Pacifica, we had it for 5 years, and fully 2/3 of all the kilometers we put on it were in pure electric mode only. So we would buy gas about once every 3 months for it. So they are very good options, but they still have a lot of the drawbacks of having a gas car, which is you still do have to go to a gas station once in a while. They still require oil changes every year. They still have all the complexity of a gas car, and I'll get into that in a little bit. Now, the other option that is what we think is the best option, if you will, is battery electric vehicle. We are the Electric Vehicle Council of Ottawa, so there's no surprise there. Fully electric vehicles like the Nissan Leaf, the Chevy Bolt, all the Teslas, and there are many, many more on their way. These use a battery to store the energy and electric motors for propulsion. They're very mechanically simple. They're very reliable, and we'll get into that in a second. And they're really fun to drive. So I'll get into that right now, actually. So driving an EV compared to a fossil car, most people are familiar with internal combustion vehicles, right? They've been around forever. So driving an EV is a little different. It's the same for the most part, but they're quicker. They accelerate faster. They have regenerative braking, so you don't use the brakes as much as you would in a conventional car, because the electric motors harvest the energy to slow down and put it back in the battery pack, which means your brakes don't get used as heavily or as hard as they would in a normal car, which means they last a lot longer. They also they have the option of one pedal driving, which takes a bit of getting used to if you're new to EVs. But basically what that means is you never actually have to put your foot on the brake. You can just leave it on the accelerator pedal. We don't call it a gas pedal. We call it an accelerator. And you push harder to go faster. And when you take your foot off, it'll slow down and stop. And yes, the brake lights do come on. So that's an interesting way of driving. I don't recommend it for highways. It's a little awkward, but for stop and go traffic, it is amazing, because you push down to go and you ease off to stop, and it's just so much nicer to drive and stop and go traffic with one pedal driving. Maintenance on an EV is significantly different than a fossil car. A typical gas car has between 2 and 3,000 moving parts. An EV has between 20 and 30. So it's an order of magnitude or two simpler mechanically. And simplicity means reliability, right? When you make things complex, they tend to become less reliable. You also don't have to do anything with oil changes. There's no oil to change. There's no tune-ups. There's no transmissions. There's no transmission fluid, no spark plugs, no exhaust systems, no timing belts, no cylinder gaskets, all the stuff that goes wrong on your typical old gas car. EVs don't have any of that. As I mentioned earlier, the brakes last 4 to 5 times longer. The president of EVCO, he has a Tesla Model S. It's about 10 years old now. He currently has 290,000 kilometers on it. And he only had to replace the brakes last year at 275,000 kilometers is when he changed the brakes. So they were original brakes up to over 250,000 kilometers on that vehicle. EVs have lower operating costs, between 75 and 80% less for fuel versus a gas car. It costs between $1 and $3 to go 100 kilometers in an EV. My EV takes about $8 to fill it to full, and I get a 400 to 500 kilometer range when I do that. Whereas a typical tank of gas, I'm sure most of you know, costs up to $70, maybe $100, depending on the vehicle, right? So EVs are significantly cheaper to fill, and because they have less maintenance, they are significantly cheaper to maintain. So 70% less for maintenance. I just have to clear my throat just a sec. Sorry about that. Thank you. All right. One of the other advantages of having an EV is you always wake up with a full tank of gas, right? Well, it's not gas, it's electricity, but you get the idea. So you plug them in overnight when you get home, just like you do with your cell phone or whatever. And they charge up overnight while you sleep. And you wake up in the morning and they're good to go. No need to pump gas and stand outside at -20 with the wind. And most EVs, because they're long range now, you don't even have to charge them every night. You can go many nights without charging. I currently charge my car about once a week. And when I charge it, I just get home, plug it in, walk away, and then the next morning it's good to go. So it's not a big deal at all, and it's super convenient. And I never miss going to a gas station. You can also preheat and cool them. And now this sounds like a nice to have, right? It sounds okay, yeah. So you can run the remote start or whatever, and okay, fair enough. But what's really cool with an EV is that because you plug them in overnight, right? And most of them have these automatic climate timers. It unlocks this thing that I never knew I needed in my life until I had it. And the story is this: we bought a used EV 5 years ago, a Nissan Leaf, and we got it in May. And so we had our car, and I was just messing around with the infotainment, exploring the new car, and I came across climate timer, and I'm like, oh, what's this? And it says, what time do you typically leave for work in the morning? And I'm like, oh, I leave for work at 8 a.m. Right. So I put that in Monday to Friday, and then I, pushed okay, and it saved it. And I'm like, okay, well, that was interesting, whatever. And then I totally forgot about it. Right. And so months go by, we're driving the car, I commute to work, everything's great. And then November comes along, and I wake up, right, to the alarm, and it's dark outside, and it's like, why is it dark when the sun's not even awake? Why am I awake? And I hear people like remote starting their cars outside, and people scraping, and that sound when people's cars are scraping and the cars are whining, and it's just like, oh my God, winter's here already. Seriously, I'm not ready for this. So I put on my coat and I put on my boots, and I'm kind of grumbling, and I go outside. I'm like, I have to scrape, stupid winter. And I look at the car, and I don't have to scrape. And so I come back in, and my wife's like, what's wrong? Like, what's the matter? How come you're not scraping the car? I'm like, I don't have to scrape the car. She's like, well, what do you mean? Aren't you going to work? And I'm like, yeah, but it's already defrosted. And she's like, well, what do you mean it's defrosted? I'm like, well, I guess the climate timer came on because the car, knew it was cold outside. And so it just like warmed itself up off the power from the house. And there's no scraping. I don't have to scrape anymore. Like, it defrosted itself. And she's like, that's it. We live in the future. That's amazing. This is the best thing ever. Like, how come nobody talks about this? So yeah, if you have a climate timer and an EV, you don't have to scrape, and you don't pollute while it's doing that, right? It'll run off the electricity. So I think that's pretty fantastic. So that's a huge selling point for us in this family, because I hate scraping the car. And yeah, there's less maintenance. I didn't write this slide, but needle knocker thingy, I guess, is a generic term for stuff you don't understand about what the mechanic tells you is wrong with your car. I've definitely been there where you show up and it's making this weird noise, and the mechanic's like, "Yeah, well, you have to change out the doodad thingy, and it's going to be like $800." Right? So EVs don't have that. There's less maintenance because there's less to go wrong. So all right. So how do you charge? I talked a lot about charging and plugging in. So there's three different types of charging. They're not different types. They're three levels of charging. So we call them level 1 to 3, just because we're very creative. Level 1 is what you would plug into a normal wall outlet. It's 120 volts, and the chargers usually come with the car. So when you get your EV, there's a level 1 charger included in most of them. And those literally plug into any outlet, any electrical outlet you have on your house that's 3-prong. It'll plug in and you can charge your car. Now, the newer cars take forever, but it's an option, and a lot of people, that's all they use to charge their car because, like I said, if your commute is a typical commute of 30 kilometers, a level 1 will get you about 8 kilometers per hour of charging, which is more than enough to cover 30 kilometers if you leave it plugged in all night. Level 2 chargers are dedicated appliance that you install in your house, and those charge much faster. You're looking at like an 8-hour charge versus many hours for level 1. And so this is the most common type of charger you would find at hotels, basically places where you would sleep or places where you work, where you're going to spend like an 8-hour day or an 8-hour night. And a level 2, they're relatively affordable, and it's just an appliance you install in your house. This is actually a picture of mine at my house. And then there's the level 3, and these are the cool ones. These are the ones that you find along the highway, and they will charge your car ridiculously fast. And I'll get into that in just a minute. So as I mentioned, the level 1 comes with your car. This is the one that came with my car. And I use it as an electric jerry can in a sense. And what I mean by that is I get asked all the time, what happens if you're sort of having a bad day and you're out and about and you've gone up to the cottage and you made a wrong turn and you get completely lost and now you're running low on energy and like, oh my God, what happens? Like, what are you going to do? Right. Because like if in a gas car, when you run out, you get a jerry can, you fill it up and you keep going. Right. Well, in an EV, what you would do is on your navigation, you would type in nearest fast charger. Right. And it'll tell you it's this far away. It's like 25 kilometers away from where you are. Great. The problem is you have 20 kilometers of range left, so you're not going to make it, right? That's the fear. So what do? Well, if you keep this in your car, because it came with your car, you keep it in the frunk or the trunk or wherever you want. And you're because you've failed in planning and you're just having the worst day of your life. You roll up to anywhere there's electricity. So like a corner store, a gas station, ironically, your neighbor's house, whatever it is. And you say, listen, I am having a really rough day. Is it all right if I just plug in for a few minutes to get some range into my car so I can make it to the charger? And I think most people would say, yeah, no worries, because it doesn't cost much. It's pennies per kilometer, right? It's a few pennies. You can give them a toonie and it'll cover more than what it takes in energy to charge. And you plug in for a little bit and it'll give you the couple kilometers you need to get to a proper charger, and then you're back on your day, back on your way with a proper charge. And so that's what I mean by electric jerry can. But some people use these as their only source of charging, and that's totally cool too. Like I mentioned, you can get more than 30 kilometers. You can get up to 50 kilometers of range every night if you plug in with a level 1. So if your daily needs are less than 50 kilometers, which most people's are, then this will more than tide you over as your only source of charging. They're small, they're lightweight, they can be plugged into any outlet, and yeah, they're pretty cool. So level 2, this is my level 2 on the front of my house. And this is like an appliance, right? So this is when you buy an EV and you want a level 2, you just say, you know what, I'm just going to add an appliance to my house. They cost between $500 and $1,000, ish, depending on the model, but they're all basically the same thing. They're just a fancy switch. So you can get the cheap one and you're not missing out on anything. But if you get the expensive one, they'll probably be weather resistant more and whatnot. But essentially you're buying an appliance, you're installing it on your house, and you can charge up a lot faster. And why would you want to do this if a level 1 is good enough? Well, maybe you commute more than you can cover in a night with a level 1. Or in my case, we have two EVs. And so what we do is we share the two EVs across this one charger, because this charger will charge up our car overnight. And most of the time, we don't need to charge our EVs every day, both of them, right? We charge one on one night, the other on the other night, and then we skip a few days. So having an EVSE like this allows you to have more than one EV. And it also enables things like preheating and pre-cooling and leaving the car running to charge while it's on and your kid's sleeping in the back. And so I have small children. I had a minivan. And one of the things that would always happen is we'd be out and about and our kids would fall asleep in the back, right? Nap time comes, we're out on the road and they pass out. And what we would do is we'd just roll into the driveway, leave the car idling because it's electric, right? It's idling, plug it in, and it'll charge while the car's running and the AC is on and the kids are sleeping in the back, and they'll finish their nap in the car. It's all climate controlled and wonderful. And you'll still have a charge because the EV can do it. So that's the kind of thing that allows and enables. Level 3. So these are the DC fast chargers. Tesla calls them superchargers. We call them DCFCs, level 3s. These are used on road trips. Most of these will charge a modern EV in between 20 and 40 minutes. So you're looking at like a lunch break, and they'll add up to 1,500 kilometers of range per hour on some cars, right? Depends on your car, but essentially these are really fast. And so the idea behind these is you have a modern EV that can do 300, 400, 500 kilometers to a charge. So you set off on your road trip and you get to, Kingston, Napanee, that kind of area, if you're heading down to Toronto, and you stop at one of these and you charge up for 15 minutes, have a sandwich, have some lunch, go to the washroom. And by the time you're done that, your car is ready to go for the next leg. And that's another 300 kilometers. And that's what these are used for. And so these are really fast chargers. You wouldn't put one of these in your house because hydro would not allow you to have that much electricity come to a house. You're basically getting the raw feed from hydro. So these things are pretty cool. You do pay for them. And when I did 1,000-kilometer road trip a couple of weeks ago, I went down to Lake Simcoe and back in my new car. And the charge stops are all 15 minutes long. They cost about $15. So you're looking at around $1 a minute ish, depending on your car. So the whole trip, we did 1,000 kilometers. It cost $45 in charging. So compare that to a gas car, and that's less than a tank of gas as far as I know. So that's sort of the cost you're looking for. They do cost more, but you're getting a lot faster speeds, right? The level 2 will charge your car for about $8. These will charge it for about $15. All right, so the plugs, right? So I got asked a lot about the plugs. People are concerned about like what happens if I buy a Toyota and I have a charger from another company. Like what's the deal? So in North America, they've standardized around the J1772 standard. This is a SAE standard for automotive engineers, right? The Society of Automotive Engineers has standardized the plug for electric cars. So every electric car sold in North America will have this plug, and they will always have this plug going forward. So if you install a level 2 charger on your house, you spend the $1,000 or $500 or whatever, and you've bought the appliance, you can be confident in saying that every car in the future that you will buy will use that plug. Even the Teslas have the ability to use this plug. And I'll get to Tesla in a minute because they're kind of a special walled garden snowflake kind of thing. But just take it as fact that every EV will use a J1772 to do the normal charging that you would need. So this handles all the basic charging needs, both level 1 and 2. Now, there are 2 standards for fast charging. There is the current standard for all cars in North America, and then there's the old standard for some of the legacy cars that still are on the road, like my Leaf. The main standard is called CCS, right? That is the combined charge system. And that is a combination. If you look, I don't know if you can see, I don't have a laser pointer, but basically on the top 2 pictures, the top part, the circle part, is the J1772 plug. It's the exact same plug. And what the CCS combo does is it adds 2 pins at the bottom, and these are for the DC fast charging bit. So all new cars coming out today and have been for years use CCS, and this is the standard for fast charging. Some of the older cars use CHAdeMO, and CHAdeMO is a Japanese standard. It's from the early days in electric vehicles, when Japan had a bit of a lead, and it means something like a nice walk or a nice tea or something. Like it's a Japanese phrase, and it's really cute. But basically, it's a standard that's being phased out slowly in North America. Most charging stations still support CHAdeMO, but it is a slower standard. It's only 50 kilowatts versus up to 350 kilowatts. And most cars don't support CHAdeMO. So it's mostly just the Leaf. And the reason it's still around as a standard in North America is because the Leaf sold so well, that there's just so many cars out there that have it that they decide to, the charging providers decide to keep it around. But that standard is on its way out. So most, if not all, new cars have CCS as their main charging standard, and that'll be the one going forward. It's a bit more elegant, it's a bit slicker, it's a bit faster. So that's that. Now, Tesla. Tesla is their own walled garden. And the reason they're a walled garden is because they sort of created the EV industry in a sense, right? And so in the early days when people were still struggling to figure out standards and whatnot, Tesla said, you know what, we're not going to wait for the SAE to figure out what they're going to do. We're just going to do our own thing. And if you guys want it, great, you can license it. And if you don't, then whatever, do your own thing. And so they came out with a Tesla plug, and that's the plug at the top. And this plug is actually really neat. It handles both fast and slow charging, right? AC and DC charging. It's a very elegant solution. Unfortunately, it's proprietary to Tesla, so only Teslas can use Tesla chargers. Tesla does provide an adapter for Tesla owners. So when you buy a Tesla, you do get an adapter to a J1772, which means that Tesla owners can use non-Tesla chargers, but only Teslas can use Tesla chargers. Now, that may not be true forever. In the future, they may switch to CCS. And the reason is because in Europe, the EU has mandated that Tesla and all automakers must support CCS. And so in Europe, they actually ship cars that do not have a proprietary Tesla charger. They use the CCS like everybody else. And that may happen in North America if regulators start doing that too. Tesla owners cannot use most DC fast charging that are not Tesla branded. They can only use the superchargers, which are pictured there. But they can use a CHAdeMO adapter. So the old standard that the Leaf uses, they can use that, but it's a lot slower than a supercharger. And the adapter itself is many $100s, like it's $400 or $600, something like that. So it's extremely expensive and really doesn't give you that much benefit as a Tesla owner because the charging rates are pretty slow for CHAdeMO. All right, so where are all these chargers, right? So what you're looking at here is a map of all the non-Tesla chargers available in our region down to Toronto and back. And you'll notice that a lot of them are piled up on top of each other. So when you zoom in, they actually get more, you get more little marks on the map. So it's kind of neat. But all the orange ones are the super fast charging, and all the green ones are the slightly slower charging. And so as you can tell, you're pretty well covered. I mean, if your car has a 300 to 400 kilometer range, like most current EVs on the market do, you can see for yourself that there's plenty of coverage for charging. There's lots, like if one charger is full or if it's broken or whatever, you just go to the next one, right? And it's along all the major highways and even up into cottage country now. So charging infrastructure is pretty good, and it's getting better all the time. Now, there's always room for improvement. Nothing's perfect, but it's not bad. It's a lot better than a lot of people think. You might not notice them when you're out and about in the world, and it's probably because you're not looking for them. It sort of blends in with the other street furniture that nobody notices. Like you don't notice all the fire hydrants you pass unless you're thinking of fire hydrants, right? And EV charger is very much the same thing. Unless you're looking for an EV charger, you probably won't notice it out there. But there are apps like PlugShare, which is this app, that will tell you exactly where to find these chargers. So if you are looking for a charger, there are ways to find them, and the cars also know where these are. So if you tell your car, I need a charger, it'll point you to one and take you there. The Tesla map is also very congested and getting built out all the time. But as you can see, the Trans-Canada Highway going up past Thunder Bay is fully covered, and that's the same thing with the non-Tesla map as well. There are a couple of networks that cover all the way across the country, coast to coast. So coverage is great. The red ones are the fast superchargers. The black ones are the destination chargers. Those would be at hotels and whatnot. places where you would spend the night kind of thing. So as you can see, there's tons of coverage of both Tesla and non-Tesla chargers. Available vehicles. So Evco maintains a buyer's guide, and it's basically a place I wanted to see all the EVs that were on the market. And I thought it would be a pretty easy thing to do because I was like, oh, there can't be that many cars on the market, right? And so I put together this spreadsheet, and the spreadsheet just keeps growing and growing and growing. The link is there. So if you want to visit it, feel free to take a screenshot or a picture or whatever of the screen. And I maintain it. I keep it as up to date as possible. You can see the most recent update was April 13th, so just about a week ago. And what you'll find here is all the EVs that are currently on the market or open to pre-order. So if you can put money down towards a car, it'll be on this list. It has the pricing, it has the range, it has the battery capacity. It tells you how fast they charge. It tells you if it's front wheel drive, all wheel drive. I've actually adjusted it so now it tells you seating, because some people were looking for 7 seats. So this will show you the cars that have 7 seats. It's a Google Doc, so you can download it and filter however you like, and you can play around with it and just see what's on the market. The ones that are in green are eligible for a $5,000 federal rebate, so they qualify for the IZEV program, the federal program to incentivize EVs. So the ones in green qualify for that. The ones that aren't in green don't yet. Some of them will very soon, but for now, I haven't updated it to include the new changes to the IZEV program. And there's also, if you scroll down a little bit, this is a picture, so I can't scroll down, but if you do scroll down, you'll see there's the average car price in North America, which is around 40,000, or in Canada, I should say, which is around $42,000. So there's a bunch of vehicles that are less expensive than the average new car sale price in Canada, which is kind of cool. And more cars are being added all the time. The other thing we're doing this summer is we've partnered with EnviroCenter and a few other groups, and we are doing test drives by appointment. So we are running a thing called EV Experience. It hasn't quite been launched yet, but basically we will be having Test Drive Tuesday. So every Tuesday night all summer long, we will announce where we'll be. And for a couple of hours every Tuesday evening, you'll be able to show up and have a test drive in a car. We'll have a bunch of other events that we're going to be announcing soon. So look for the trailer around town. We're going to be going all over the place and booking test drives. And so if you want to get into an EV, we have a few models available. They are our personal vehicles. So we are doing this as volunteers. We're not selling cars. We're just here to talk about them. And the reason we are maintaining neutrality is so that we can, tell you the truth about whatever brand you're into or whatever car you're looking at. We can give you the honest truth, because we have no dog in this fight kind of thing. We're just enthusiastic about electric cars and the electrification of transportation in general. So definitely check us out. EV Experience will be the website when it launches. Currently there's a placeholder, but you can sign up to a newsletter to stay abreast of all of the upcoming events. And I think we have some more resources here. So our website, evco.ca. We also have plugshare.com. That's the website I talked about with all the chargers, the buyer's guide I just showed you, and a better route planner is actually kind of neat. So that is a website. It's an app as well. And basically what that does is you tell it which kind of car you have, and then you tell it where you are and where you're going to go, and like for road trips, and it'll plot out your whole trip. And it'll tell you like stop here, charge for 5 minutes, go here, charge for 5 minutes or whatever, and it'll figure it out. And it'll do it based on weather and elevation and like how good your car is and all the rest. It's really sophisticated. It's really cool. Definitely worth checking out. I mean, you don't have to use it. You can just hop in and drive as well. I did that down to Lake Simcoe. But it's definitely neat if you want to sort of play around and see what EVs can do. And I did mention the federal government offers $5,000 rebate on eligible EVs. The buyer's guide shows those in green. All right. And at this point, I think we'll be taking questions. So Mitchell and Emma.
Thanks, Mike. I've been fielding a couple questions in the chat for while you were presenting.
Cool.
I had a couple that have come up that I think are best answered by you rather than by me.
Okay.
So I was going to start with an easy one that I hope you could speak to is what the impact of cold weather is on driving range, and potentially even what features EVs have that help increase the range or reduce the impact of cold on them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So there's a few things to consider. Winter weather does impact EVs, and it impacts gas cars too. But there are things you can do in an EV to mitigate that impact. Like I said, you charge overnight, right? So the climate preheating definitely helps reduce the impact of cold weather on an EV. If you have the climate timer set, they also do battery preheating. So while it's plugged into the house, it'll warm itself up, and you'll get the maximum range in the cold. If you don't do that, then you do get a bit of a hit, up to 20% kind of thing. But if you keep the car warm, it's all about thermal stuff, right? It's all about keeping the battery warm and happy. And so, like if you're on a road trip, for example, in the middle of winter, the battery will be warm because you're using it, you're charging it, you're driving. And so you'll have close to your normal range in the winter, even if it's cold out, with a warm battery. It's all about keeping that battery warm. Now, there are things EVs do as well to keep to stay efficient. Most EVs come with a heat pump, right? An air source heat pump. And that uses a very little bit of energy to create a lot of heat. And so those are super efficient ways of heating the cabin. Some of the older EVs don't have those, and so they use a resistive heater, kind of like your toaster oven kind of thing. And those are a lot less efficient, and they will burn through your battery pretty quick to heat up your cabin. But the ones with heat pumps, and most EVs now have heat pumps, are pretty good about not using too much energy to keep you and them, the car, warm in the winter. So there are range hits, but they're not as bad as reported sometimes, or as they were in the past.
Great. Mike, could you go back to the
Yes.
previous slide just to have the resources there as well, just
Sure.
if
Yeah.
people are looking for those?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I see that Tom has his hand raised. I'm wondering whether or not he could just jump in with his quick question. I don't know if I
Sure.
can just unmute him.
I'm Go for it.
Okay. I think I could just press that button and he can now unmute himself. I'm just gonna let him ask the question.
Hi, Tom. I can't hear you.
Yeah, I think you're on mute. Sorry. Oh, unmuted. Oh. Nope, still on mute. Maybe it's the audio source that you're using. I'll let
Yeah, I can't hear you still.
sorry,
You're
we can't hear you, but if you want to put your question in the chat, I'll try to relay that to Mike and maybe he can elaborate on it. Sorry about the
absolutely.
technical issue there.
Yeah, maybe check on your computer itself if it's muted or not, like the input source, if you're
Um,
feeding the right source to Zoom.
yeah, so while Tom's trying to figure that out,
Sure.
could I ask what the impact of fast charging is on battery life, as well as what is the recommended charging levels in order to
Yes.
maintain proper battery health for like the long term of
Right.
the life of the
Absolutely.
vehicle?
Yes. Okay. So fast charging doesn't seem to have much impact on battery health, as it turns out. They were in the early days of EVs. It was kind of assumed that like you hit it hard with fast charging and you'll hurt your battery. But for most people, most of the time, like unless you're only using fast chargers and you're hammering them like every single day, you're not going to notice any degradation because of fast charging on your battery. Most of your normal use cases, you do it once a week or even once a month or whatever. It doesn't hurt the battery at all. The newer battery chemistries, there's a new chemistry coming out, lithium iron phosphate. It's going to be less expensive to produce. It doesn't have all the expensive minerals in it. And so those are going to hit the market soon, and they will happily go up to 100%. But with the lithium ion stuff, I mean, you can charge them to 100% as much as you want. The battery has a battery manager in all the cars, but the general thoughts are you charge up to 80 and then use it down to 10, 20, and then back up to 80. So keep it sort of in the middle there for maximum longevity, but there's no reason why you can't go up to 100%.
Testing
That's
one, two,
not a,
three, testing.
oh, we can hear you now. Awesome. So yeah, generally you want to charge on a road trip, you want to charge to 80, not for battery health reasons, but actually for time reasons. it takes as much time to charge from 0 to 80% as it does to charge from 80 to 100%. And the way I like to explain this is think of like you fill your backyard with empty buckets and you have a fire hose and you want to fill all the buckets without spilling any water, right? So at the beginning, you can just let it rip, right? And you can let it rip all the way up until kind of the 80% mark, and then you have to start throttling it way back so you don't spill too much water over the buckets, right? You don't want the buckets to overflow. And so chargers work the very much the same way, where they, for the first 80%, they can pump a lot of power into that pack and charge it up real quick. But then once they hit 80%, they start to throttle way back because they don't want to go above 100%. That's bad for a lot of reasons. And so they throttle all the way back, which means that from 80 to 100%, it takes forever. So on a road trip, typically you only charge up to 80% just for time reasons. You can charge to 100, but then you're going to be paying a lot more for it. It's more efficient to just, hop on the road and do another 300 kilometers and charge again later. I think that covers it. Tom, did you want to go now?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, I was wondering why the electric vehicle group does not list e-bikes, or for that matter, it doesn't list big trucks or anything, but they're more primitive at this point. But why aren't e-bikes listed along with the cars? Because they're an even more economical and solution to getting around. I mean, I have an e-bike and I use it all winter as well. I have two-wheel drive.
Yeah.
And I'd like to suggest that EVCO consider listing e-bikes as well, especially local resources in Ottawa.
Yeah, that's a great point and a great question. The main reason is because it's me that maintains the buyer's guide, and I just don't have enough time to stay on top of e-bikes. I also wanted to put motorcycles in there as well. And I did for a little bit, but there's so many changes in the market all the time with e-bikes and motorcycles. I mean, I'm having trouble keeping track of just the four-wheeled vehicles that are coming on. And I mean, if somebody wants to help me and volunteer to maintain an e-bike registry, then that'd be awesome. I would totally support that. But it's just sort of a resource issue as to why. We have a lot of members that do bike to our meetings and stuff with e-bikes. We are huge fans of e-bikes and all forms of non-combustion transportation. But basically the answer is I just don't have time. Sorry if that's, yeah.
I had another question that came through a little bit earlier as well, wondering about the effect that towing has on electric vehicles and if there are electric vehicles that do offer towing.
Yes, there are vehicles. They're all in the buyer's guide. I do actually list tow ratings for all the vehicles that have them. Towing does impact the range quite a bit. You can count on like a 50% hit while you're towing. But I mean, that's true with gas cars. Most people tow with pickup trucks, and they're so inefficient to begin with that you don't notice you're buying an extra tank of gas because you're towing. But with EVs, they show it right on the dash, right? You're used to getting this, and the range is only this right now because you're towing something. But yes, EVs absolutely can tow, and they actually are very good at towing. They have a lot of torque. EVs have all the torque at 0 RPM, so getting off the line with a trailer is not an issue. There was a TV show that did excuse me, a TV show that did a test, and they were looking for the fastest. I think it was a Lotus Elise or something. And so they were racing a Tesla and a Lotus Elise, and they're like, "What's the fastest Lotus Elise in the world?" And it turns out the fastest Lotus Elise in the world is the one that's on a trailer being towed by a Tesla in a drag race against a Lotus Elise. So it was quite the demo, but yes, you can tow with an EV.
Great. I think I answered this one, but I'm hoping you could elaborate on it in
Sure.
terms of the charging stations that are there for road trips for level threes. Do you encounter any lineups for those? And if so, what kind of situations do people get into when they're waiting for a charge, and what can they do to kind of alleviate that?
Sure. That's a great question as well. So personally, I haven't encountered any lineups. Usually when I hit up a fast charger, they're completely deserted. I'm the only one. And that's been the case for like the entire time I've had my EV now. But Yeah, I haven't traveled on, Thanksgiving weekend or something. So presumably, yes, people will line up. What I can say is that the faster your car charges, the faster the throughput is, right? And as EVs advance and get faster and faster with charging speeds, the throughput of the chargers themselves gets better because the cars are only there for like 10, 15 minutes. Usually you're just waiting for the first person to be done and then, you hop in. I mean, there are instances where Teslas have had huge lineups in the US and places on like holiday weekends and whatnot. But those lines seem to move pretty quickly. The other thing is that there are enough locations nowadays along the main highways like the 401, 417, that kind of thing, into Quebec and stuff, where if you hit up a charger and there's like a huge line at the charger, then you can probably just go to the next one and you'll probably have better luck at the next one, right? So it's just a question of where you're going and how you're planning and when you're going and that kind of thing. But for the most part, the lines haven't been too bad yet, and they are building out more chargers all the time. So the busier ones tend to get more stalls built in. The hard part was getting the locations in. The locations are now pretty well in across Canada, and so now it's just a question of adding more units as demand demands it.
Great. I guess another general question has been, in the event that you do run out of charge or you need a charge,
Mhm.
is there an option for people that, like say you've lost power, you live in a rural area, there is no electricity for you, as well as potentially you're just doing a road trip and you missed your charger or your exit and you're just stuck on the side of the highway.
Sure.
What would you do in either of those situations?
Well, I mean, if everything goes completely pear-shaped, you can always just call a tow truck like everybody else. But most of the time, like if you're like, say I'm up at the cottage and the power goes out, right? Usually the car will have been charging at some point, during the days prior to the power going out. And so you'll have some amount of power. Like it's very rare that my car sits in the driveway with 0% or 5% or even under 20%, right? Because usually you plug it in before then. So it'll have a significant charge in the car in the case of a blackout. Like it's highly unlikely that a blackout will catch you sort of with no charge in your car. But yeah, on the highway, I mean, an ounce of planning or an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure, kind of thing, right? So um, if you're on a road trip, presumably you've sort of planned a bit of a plan B, maybe like your main stop will be Kingston. But if I hit traffic or whatever, I might stop somewhere a bit closer or maybe a little bit farther down, right? So it's very unlikely that you'll end up in a situation where you're sort of dead on the side of the road with no charge. You really have to try to do that. Like it's more of a deliberate choice at that point. It's very unlikely that you'll be stranded with no power. And part of that is because one of the questions we get asked a lot is like, well, what happens if I'm on a road trip and I hit traffic, right? Like I get to the GTA and we've all experienced this, right? We're getting to Montreal or whatever, we've got a quarter tank of gas, and then oh my god, there's a huge traffic jam, somebody's jackknifed on the highway. Like what do you do? And in a fossil car, that's a problem, right? Because as you're sitting there in traffic idling, you're burning through that gas that's left, and if you're down to like an eighth of a tank, it gets a little nerve-wracking, and then you're like, you might run out, right? You might be stuck on the highway and your car will run out. But with an EV, when you're not moving, you're not really consuming any power, right? So the only power you would be using would be to heat and cool the cabin, and that's only a few hundred watts. An EV can, keep the cabin warm or cold for days, like days and days and days, like a week sometimes, depending on your car. So that's not the issue. Where you use the power is actually moving the vehicle. So if you hit traffic in an EV and you're down to like 25%, you're good because you'll just stay there at 25% until the traffic starts going again, right? You're not burning fuel, or you're not burning through your battery while you're not moving. It'll just stay there until you're good to go. So hitting traffic isn't actually a bad thing as far as energy consumption goes. Hopefully that answered the question.
I think it did, or at least it gave us a pretty good anecdote of how that all works.
Mm-hmm.
Um, let's see, I got a couple here. Um, I think that one. Yeah. So one more is just a comment adding on to what things you've said.
Cool.
Um, I know your car, Mike. Maybe this is a good one for you. Uh, in terms of what vehicles can do for powering your house in the event of a power outage,
Hmm.
um, could you elaborate on some of that technology and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so most modern EVs have battery packs that are sort of upwards of 60 kilowatt hours, right? And like, what does that mean, right? The typical household in Canada uses about 24 kilowatt hours per day, right? To run your house. Like that's air conditioner, fridge, stove, all the rest of it, right? That's 24 kilowatt hours per day, which means the typical EV has about 3 days of power if you fully charge it in the battery pack. So it easily has 1 or 2 days of power in the car. Some cars have more, like the F-150 has a lot more. The Ford F-150 Lightning that's coming out. It's a pickup truck. Some cars let you do vehicle to load, which is what my car does. It has a standard household outlet in the car, and you can plug literally anything you plug into a household outlet, you can plug into my car and it'll run it for days. It's 1.9 kilowatts, and so it'll run, a toaster, it'll run a coffee maker. I use it to run astronomy gear. And it'll do that forever, right? For days and days. But other vehicles like the F-150 that's coming out, I think they just actually started deliveries yesterday. Those can run a whole house, right? Like you buy a special charger that you would install on your house. It's a two-way charger, right? So you normally would use it to charge your car with a level 2. But then in the case of a blackout, there's like fancy relays and stuff that switch over, and then all of a sudden your pickup truck in the driveway becomes the household backup battery, and it'll run your house for about 3 days if you have typical usage. So that technology absolutely exists. It's coming to market more and more. Not all vehicles support it. Teslas famously do not support any vehicle to load ability, so you cannot take power out of a Tesla to power stuff unless you jerry rig something. But more and more cars, the Ioniq 5, which is what I have, the EV6, a bunch of Hyundai Kias are coming out with that ability, as well as Fords and Chryslers and Ram and Chevys. So more and more EVs are sort of going to fill the role of backup battery, backup generator for households. If you want to install that capability, I mean, you need electricians and whatnot, but it is an option for sure.
Great. We had an interesting question that's maybe not exclusively to EVs, but
Sure.
in terms of the feasibility of a solar power installation for a complementary like to complementarily power your vehicle,
Mm-hmm.
um, what's the feasibility of putting that on a car versus putting it on a house and what the payback is?
Oh yeah, that's a great question. I get that a lot. So on a car, it's not that feasible unless you have like there are a couple of cars coming to market that are solar powered cars. I actually pre-ordered one and then canceled it. Aptera is the company that has a car. It's a solar powered car, right? But the issue is all about consumption, right? It's EVs can be pretty thirsty for what a solar panel can deliver because solar panels aren't hugely efficient. And you need quite a bit of real estate to get meaningful power out of solar, right? So the car just doesn't, a typical car just doesn't have the roof space, literally, to generate enough electricity to really, power the car. Aptera has done some really clever stuff, but they're the exception more than the rule. The more reasonable way of powering your car with the sun would be to mount the solar panels on the roof of your house, right? Because you got to live somewhere, and roofs are typically pretty big and they face up. And so you can install quite a bit of solar on most roofs. And that's more than enough usually to power an EV. And then there are definitely ways of powering your EV. A lot of people do that. And so they essentially fill their EV for free, right? And zero marginal cost because they're generating the solar energy for free and it just goes onto their car during the day. So that's definitely a thing. But yeah, you want to put it on your roof because you need quite a bit of solar panels to do it.
Great. Um, maybe this is another thing around EVs as a benefit, but when we're talking about EVs and regenerative braking,
Mm-hmm.
what's the benefit of regenerative braking on the extra range that can provide um, potentially looking at it as well if you were driving up a hill versus down a hill and what
Sure.
that means. Maybe speak to it in that sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a good argument. So if you live in a hilly area, that's a good argument for only charging to 80%. Because once you leave your house, if you have to go downhill, you can regenerate another significant amount of power down the hill. Whereas if your battery's already full, then it just gets wasted in the brakes, right? Um, Regen doesn't add a huge amount of range to your car normally, like in normal driving use. Um, I noticed with my Pacifica, right, my plug-in hybrid, that I would get about 2 kilometers of range from going from highway speed to a dead stop, like when you exit the highway, right? You would slow down and you would get about 2 kilometers of range put back in the battery. So that gives you kind of the sense like you're using a lot of energy to get up to speed, and there's losses, right? There's inefficiencies and friction and all the rest. So you're not going to get 100% of it back as you slow down. So unfortunately, we have yet to invent the perpetual motion machine with regen, but it does contribute something, right? Like every time you're slowing down or going down a hill, it's putting a little bit back in the pack, and it'll just extend your range a few percentage here and there, and it does add up over time, especially if you live, somewhere like in BC where you might live on the top of a hill and commute to work at the bottom, right? There's a mine in Austria that has an all electric dump truck, like one of these massive off road dump trucks, like the ones where the wheels are the size of my house. And it's pure electric. And what they do, the mine is at the top of a mountain, right? They're like doing this thing where they're, hollowing out a mountain. And then the thing that crushes all the rocks is at the bottom of the mountain, right? And so what they do is they fill the truck up with rocks at the top of the mountain, right? They coast down the hill, recharging the battery in the truck all the way down to the bottom because it got full of rocks and they're using gravity. And they get to the bottom, they dump the rocks, and then they drive all the way back up the mountain on pure electric charge. And they never have to plug in the vehicle because it's just the mass and the gravity are enough to fully charge that battery on the way down, and then they don't even deplete it all the way on the way up. So it's like that's a perpetual motion type of thing, but you're adding energy with gravity and physics and stuff. But that's a kind of use case where regen is really neat. But for most of the time, yeah, it'll add a few percent here and there, but it's not a huge amount.
Perfect. Maybe a general question. This is probably a question I could probably answer as well, but maybe you could speak to maybe how practical an EV is for somebody who lives in an apartment who may not have overnight charging.
Mm.
Is there a is the current charging network suitable for that, or does it kind of depend on how the vehicle's used?
I would say it depends on how the vehicle's used. I think you might be in a better position to answer this than me, Mitchell. But yeah, apartment charging is still a challenge for EVs for sure. There are ways that you can do it, but it's not the easiest thing. Like ideally, your unit, your condo, or your apartment would install chargers somewhere in the parking garage, for example. But most places don't have that, right? So then you're looking at using your EV more like a gas station type model where you would hit up a charger somewhere, which is completely doable. It depends on how much you drive, though, right? And how convenient it is for you and like where you go in your normal daily activities. If you're always hitting up, Saint Laurent Shopping Center or whatever, or Place d'Orleans, I guess, has the charger in the basement. So if you're always hitting up Place d'Orleans, for example, every Saturday kind of thing for the afternoon, then you can absolutely, charge up your car there while you're shopping and doing your thing, and then, drive it for, most of the week, and then come back and, every Saturday, use it like a gas station. Or you could use a fast charger and just, pay to do it and do that, once a week. Because a lot of EVs are, you charge them like, once every 3-4 days kind of thing. So it depends on your lifestyle and your usage, really. If you're like a heavy driver, like you drive a lot, then it's probably not ideal. But I mean, if there's a will, there's a way. But yeah, it is a challenge for sure. I don't know if you want to add something, Mitchell.
I'll add briefly that as part of the city's plans to put in more charging stations, we're looking at areas in which the city has a greater number of people who live in rental accommodations to support some additional charging locations in those areas. And so we would be looking to put those in at community centers where people come in for either after school activities or for swimming lessons or for hockey tournaments and those kind of things. where people are kind of spending an hour or two,
Yeah.
potentially longer even, as kind of if you're visiting them every day, then it gives you that peace of mind of having a charging option within your community. So,
Yeah, and I think it's important to point out that the thing about EVs is that what's really different about gas cars and takes kind of a way of shifting your thinking about cars is that you're not necessarily, you don't have to refill them, right? Like with a gas car, right? What you do typically, what most people do is you go to a gas station, you fill her up, right? And then you drive around for however long, a week or whatever, or maybe half a week, depending on if you're want to, like my neighbor, and you just have a heavy foot. And so, but the point is, you drive around for several days, and every day you wake up, you have a random amount of fuel left in your tank, and then at some point, you're like, oh, I'm low, I got to fill up again, right? And that's sort of the model that you use, right? You're just sort of you fill up sort of as needed, right? With an EV, what you do when you're charging is you're just replacing what you used in a given day, right? And so you only need to charge for the amount of time it took you to replace the kilometers that you've driven in a given period of time. And so if you're charging frequently, even if you're kind of a high mileage driver, if you're going to like IKEA and the Rito Center and like random places where they have level 2s around town, there's one on Main Street here. And you're plugging in for like 20 minutes here, half an hour there, an hour here, you're watching a movie, it lands down and you plug in for 2 hours. I mean, that is more than enough to cover most daily driving for a few days, right? The typical EV on a level 2 takes only a few hours to fully charge. So if you're stopping like a hummingbird and just charging all over the place, then there's a good chance that you'll more than recover enough range in like one day to cover several days of driving doing that kind of thing, right? So it's all about your usage, is my point.
great. In terms of that buyer's guide you have there,
Mm-hmm.
how current would you say the lead times are on those vehicles?
I would say they are best guesses.
Okay, that's fine.
um,
We just had a question around like that the Hyundai Kona that you got there. Is that still 8 to 12 weeks, or is
so
it?
I'll tell you, it's a guide. It's not meant to be the truth or the gospel or whatever you want to call it. These estimates, these time estimates come from me literally calling the dealers and asking them like, hey, if I were to order a Kona today, how long would it take? And depending on which dealer I talk to, they give me a different answer, right? And so I just sort of go with the most reasonable sounding answer that they give me. But of course, if you talk to a different dealer, they may give you a different answer, right? So it all depends. These are more to give you a sense of, okay, there aren't any in town right now, and I'm probably looking at a couple, 3 months, 4 months or longer to get them. A lot of EVs are sort of sold out for the next year, depending on the model. But some of them you might get lucky and they might have one in stock, right? I mean, they show up on the forums and stuff all the time. So it's really more of a they're not available right now kind of thing than they will take for 12 weeks for sure kind of thing, if that makes
Great.
sense.
Yeah. And could you elaborate maybe on what the used market looks like for EVs?
It's crazy. So I bought my first EV used. It's a Nissan Leaf. I bought it on Auto Trader. I found it. It was like 13 grand. And yeah, they are available. Most of them are Leafs. Most of them are older, and the prices are going up because demand is crazy right now. But it all depends. Like it changes literally every day on Auto Trader. There's different cars, and I have a few searches saved because I actually want to replace my Leaf. And every day I get an email like, "Oh, there's a new car that's been added to your search results." And so it's one of these things where depending on what you're looking for, you're either going to get really lucky or it'll take forever. If you want an e-Golf, for example, you might be waiting a long time because those things are rare birds. They're super great cars. They're available used sometimes. It all depends. It's the luck of the draw, but there are definitely used EVs out there and they are great. And they're definitely a cheaper option.
Perfect. I'm gonna run through a couple of these that are sort of quick.
Sure.
Cash incentives for used EVs. I think there's a couple of those still available, right?
Yeah, Plug and Drive has one. I can't recall the details off the top of my head, but there's definitely a Plug and Drive one. like a course you do, like a brief little thing, a survey, I think, and then yeah. So there's incentives if you look for them, but plug and drive would be the place to look.
Okay. Performance of EVs on highway driving versus city driving. I I commented that it's slightly less range in the highway driving because less if you're traveling faster, your car is going to still brake even though it's very aerodynamic.
Yeah.
And traveling at 80 kilometers an hour or 100 kilometers an hour is less efficient than driving at 60 or 40 and also benefiting from regenerative braking.
Yeah, I mean, like every car has an optimal speed where they're the most efficient, right? And usually it's sort of like 70 kilometers an hour ish, depending on the car. But they're all sort of design optimized for a speed where they are the most efficient at this speed. And if you go slower than that, it's a bit less efficient. If you go faster than that, it's less efficient. In general, yeah, if you go faster, the drag increases exponentially, right? So if you drive at 100, it's better than driving at 110, which is way better than driving at 120, right? So as you go up that curve, it gets worse and worse exponentially. So even if you slow down by 5 kilometers per hour, it actually helps a huge amount on your efficiency. But yeah, EVs are as good as normal cars on the highway, right? They're not slower. They accelerate faster. Um, I used to drive a standard. This is something I should probably have pointed out, is that the acceleration is it's kind of amazing. Like, they don't have gears, right? There's no transmissions in EVs. I mean, they have a transmission technically, but it's a fixed gear, right? You don't have to switch gears. It's a direct drive type of setup. And because they have such immediate response, you can accelerate at any speed to any speed really quickly, right? Even on the highway. So I come from driving a manual transmission, and in a manual, what you would do is, like, you're on the highway in fifth gear, and if you want to pass somebody, you got to drop it down a gear to get the acceleration. Because if you try and pass them in fifth gear, it takes forever, right? Like, you just can't accelerate. So you drop it down a gear to get that boost. With an EV, you always have that. Like, if you're going 100, you hammer it down, you accelerate really quickly. If you're going 30 and you hammer it down, you accelerate really quickly. There's never a delay in accelerating. And so in that respect, on the highway, they're kind of awesome because you can just pop out and pass really easily, more easily than a fossil car, I would say.
Great. I see that Lucas has his hand raised. I think I'll go and ask him on mute there, and he can ask his question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was wondering, what is the average lifespan of a electric car battery?
Oh, that's fantastic. Yes.
And
okay.
What is how much would it cost to replace it?
Great question. You're not the only one to ask that. So EV batteries are designed to last the life of the vehicle. So you will never have to replace the EV battery under normal use. Now, yes, there are battery replacements happening, right? The Chevy Bolt has gone through a recall, but that is the exception. That is because of a manufacturing issue. But for the most part, you will not have to pay to replace the battery in your car. They are designed to last 15 to 20 years, right, in an automotive application. And so these batteries are meant to last the life of the vehicle, and odds are your car will rust around the battery and the battery will be fine. So you won't lose the car to the battery dying. You'll lose the car to rust or mechanical failure in the shocks or something, right? And the neat thing about EV batteries is that even once they're done the 20-year sort of use case in cars, they haven't actually lost the capacity so much as lost the ability to pump out energy fast enough, right? Because a car needs a lot of current in a short period of time, right? That's how you accelerate fast, right? And that's kind of hard on batteries just in general, right? But they still have the capacity. So if you use them gently, they'll last even longer, right? And so what's going to happen, and what has been happening, is EVs will have the batteries in them for the next 15, 20 years. And then once they're done in the car, like the car gets scrapped as normal, right? Cars are very recycled already. And on EVs are no different in that sense, like the body is all the same kind of stuff. But the battery pack will go back to the car company and they'll use it in a stationary storage application. So they'll put a whole bunch of them together and they will replace a diesel generator for a building, for example, to run like an elevator in a blackout or something like that, right? And in the grid storage type applications, the stationary storage application, these used EV batteries can last another 20 years or even longer, right, in that application before they need to be recycled. And even then, at that point, they will be recycled. And there are several companies that currently recycle EV batteries. There's not a lot of feedstock right now, so what they do is they recycle the rejects from the assembly lines, right? There's yields. You know, when you manufacture anything, there's a certain percentage that you throw away because it wasn't done perfectly. And so they're recycling that, but they will also recycle batteries. And the yields that they are getting from battery recycling currently are 95%. So 95% of everything that is in the battery is reused and recycled back into new batteries. And interestingly, the only part that they can't recycle currently is the plastic bits, right? The little clips and all the rest of it that are part of the battery packs. But all the metals get recycled because it's actually cheaper to recycle the battery than to mine new metals for it. So yeah, these batteries will last quite a long time.
That's cool. I'm very happy that they really can reuse a lot, majority of the components of the battery, because resources on the earth are not infinite, right?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
So, and one quick thing, would you say the rusting of an electric vehicle, is it about the same rate as a internal combustion car or less?
I would say it's the same as every other car from a given manufacturer, right? Some manufacturers are better at rusting than others. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a car, right? It's all the same car stuff. The only difference is the powertrain, right? EVs are built on like a skateboard platform, and then they put the body on. But a lot of the other stuff in the cars, like in the EVs, is just part spin things, right? Like if you get into a Chevy Bolt, you're going to find, Chevy door handles from, an Equinox or something. You'll find the same radio knobs and the air conditioning knobs and the same seats. And, like they reuse all the part spin stuff because it's cheaper to do that. So it's all normal car stuff. The shocks are the same. The tires are the same as other cars. It's just the battery and the electric motor bits that are different, right? So they will behave. They will last as long as they last for that company, right? So if you're used to, I don't want to shame anybody, but I mean, if you're used to a Chevy, rusting out after 15 years, then yeah, I mean, the Chevy Bolt might do the same thing, right? Or maybe they've improved it, right? Some companies, like we used to have a Honda Civic back in the 80s, and that didn't do well with the rust department. But apparently new Hondas don't rust as much. So there you go, right? I mean, companies change too, but they're at the end of the day, they're just normal cars. So they'll last as normal, basically.
I'm sure, but if you rust proof, it will last longer, I'm sure.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, and you can still do that too. Yeah, it's up to you.
Thank you. Much appreciated.
No, yeah. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, I would like to say as well on that front, when we're talking about recycling EV batteries, there's a couple manufacturers as well that are looking to make a vehicle that's completely net zero. So everything from the supply chain that supplies the battery components to the manufacturing process to the delivery to customers, as well as all the components and their parts that go into the car itself, which I don't think would have happened had there not been a push to get EVs to be zero tailpipe emissions in the first place. So Volvo is the kind of brand that I'm using as an example, where they've procured zero emission steel as like one of their first forays into reducing emissions in their
one of the uses process, of hydrogen,
which is one of the uses of hydrogen. And then they're using sustainable materials in like they've removed the leather from their vehicles, and they're using cloth in places like that. They're using plastic bottles in places where there used to be petrochemical plastics and things. So all that innovation is kind of, I think, coming from the initial push to move into zero tailpipe emissions and seeing how much further they could make their vehicles on a sustainable basis.
Yeah, I mean, to Tom's point earlier, right? I mean, the best way to sort of move around is the lowest carbon way to be to walk, right? The second best would be to bike, right? But unfortunately, like our cities in North America especially aren't really designed to be very walkable or bikeable, or I mean, they're getting better, but it's a slow process, right, to redesign your city from car dependency. And yeah, I mean, making any consumer good of any kind is not exactly the cleanest thing and the best thing for the planet, right? Like you still have to mine minerals and all the rest of it. But the point is that these cars, once they're built, they basically stop polluting for the most part, right? The grid in Ontario is 95% zero emission. At peak hours, there's the gas plants that come online and pollute. But for most of the time, it's, they're not emitting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And a lot of people charge overnight, which is actually what hydro really wants us to do, because currently the nuclear plants produce too much electricity at night. And so we have to pay the Americans, we pay New York to take our power from us, because we just make too much and you can't turn off a nuclear power plant, right? So at night, EVs would soak up all that clean energy off the grid and help flatten the demand curve, which would then, in theory, possibly make hydro rates cheaper because they don't have the huge swings that they have to accommodate. But yeah, I mean, the goal here is to get people to stop burning stuff, right? The low-hanging fruit are the big cars that pollute all the time. Making cars is not clean, but it's better to make a car that doesn't burn stuff than one that does, for the climate. And then, yeah, we'll get there. Hopefully sooner than later.
I think we've got just over 10 minutes left, so I was gonna do a couple of other questions, I think, before I get to time. One question just came through, I guess, around if somebody has a two-car household and they have two gas cars, would you recommend a plug-in hybrid or a pure electric as an upgrade? And then also, if at the end of buying that new vehicle, if if the car is in good shape after, say, 15, 20 years, do you think it'd be possible to get a replacement battery, or at that point has technology advanced far enough that it makes no sense to get a new battery in an older car instead of just getting a new car?
That is a speculative question there. Okay, so the first part, if you have a two-car household and they're both fossil cars right now, I would just go pure EV for the second one, right? Because chances are you're not going to take both on a super long road trip. So you can absolutely get a cheap used older electric car that is relatively short range, 100-kilometer range, something like that. And that can be your daily driver for most of your city needs, right? That's exactly what we did in my household. We have a used Leaf. The range is 100 kilometers in the summer on a warm day with the wind at your back. So it's super short range. And the other car was, a plug-in hybrid. It was a fossil burner and it could do the road trip. So we had one car for road trips and one car for, going to the grocery store and stuff. So if you have a two-car family right now, yeah, absolutely. Ditch one of the gas ones and get a cheap used EV, I would say. If you're an only car family, then I would recommend a long range EV, but those tend to be expensive and they don't cover sort of all of the car types of bases you might want. Like there's no Jeeps that are pure EV yet. So then a plug-in hybrid would be totally reasonable as well if it's your only vehicle. But yeah, I would say pure EV for the second car if one of them's a gas car. And what you'll find is that you'll just drive the EV all the time and the gas car will sit in the driveway for a long time. And you'll have to, drive it around the block once in a while to get the oil going. As far as keeping the car for 15 years and then replacement options, that's tough. Because mechanically, chances are the EV will be fine, right? I mean, you might have to replace shocks or whatever, normal things like that. But as far as being able to you push a button and it turns on and then you drive away kind of thing, I expect a 15-year-old EV to be totally capable of doing that. And so you might want to replace it just because you want a different type of car, right? Like a different shape. Maybe you need 3 rows or something. As far as battery replacements go, I don't know if that would be a thing that would be economically feasible. I mean, the technology of batteries is advancing, but it's not advancing in leaps and bounds. Like we're talking 1 or 2% per year. So over 10 years, yes, like there are noticeable improvements in battery technology, but we're not talking about, like a computer back in the 90s where the minute you buy it, it's obsolete kind of thing, right? So a 10-year-old, 15-year-old EV battery is not going to be completely outclassed by a contemporary car in the future, right? Like they'll still be totally usable. So I would say, buy the type of car that you think will suit your needs, and then just drive it and see how long it goes. Tesla's talking about million-mile batteries, right? Like million-mile cars, where theoretically they're aiming so that somebody in their 20s buys a Tesla Model 3 and then never buys another car again until they die, kind of thing. Like, that's, people are actually seriously talking about that as being a viable option, right? But then again, like 15 years is a long time. Needs change. Maybe you have kids or something, different type of car. Yeah, that's a hard one.
I think the other question came through that we're looking at. Uh, Maybe I'll elaborate on this one and say, um, knowing that you just got a vehicle, which you're not going to buy a new vehicle anytime soon, likely,
No.
are there any, or what's the vehicle outside of the Ioniq 5 that's coming up within the next 2 or 3 years that you're excited about that other
Ooh.
people are going to get?
Definitely the Volkswagen bus, like the ID Buzz, right? It's the new microbus, the hippie bus. So Volkswagen's coming out with an all electric version of that. That is going to be super cool. I'm curious about the pickup trucks. I want to see. I'm not a pickup truck person, but I definitely am excited for somebody to get like an F-150 Lightning or the Ram thing or whatever. Like, those will be cool. Those are, yeah, very compelling vehicles for a lot of reasons. The Aptera is a 3-wheeled solar powered EV car thing, 2-seater, but it's kind of like because all EVs are sort of sports cars now. Like, we can, like, my Ioniq 5, it's a 5-seat, crossover SUV thing, they call it. It's a hatchback, but whatever. It outclasses all of the cars I had as a kid and posters, the supercars you would put up on your wall when you're a teenager. Like, my car is faster than all of those cars, right? So like the term sports car doesn't really mean anything anymore, because my car can, outclass them. But I would say that the Aptera is like it's the EV version of a sports car, where it's this like ridiculous little 2-seater that, is super cool. I want to see that in person. That would be a neat car. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to think what else is coming up in the pipelines. Mostly just pickup trucks and the ID Buzz.
Yeah, I mean, from a technology perspective, yeah, the very high price, very cool, lots of features cars are there too. I
Yeah.
also imagine there's going to be a whole other set of vehicles that come in at cheaper prices for a lot more people to get into an EV as well. So like
Yeah.
on that list there, I mean, you've got the Chevy Equinox,
Yeah.
I mean, the Imperium one is an interesting one from a Chinese brand, I think, right?
Yes. The Chinese will probably do what the Japanese did in the 90s and the 80s, and take the bottom end of the market. I don't think a lot of people are expecting that, but that's, or at least a lot of people aren't aware that that's what's going to happen. But the Chinese are very good at making cheap cars, and they're making a whole lot of them right now. A lot of cheap EVs are coming out of China, and they're just in the beginning days of expanding internationally. Imperium is one of the first, but there are several companies: Neo, BYD, Lincoln Co. There's a bunch of companies that are coming from China that have their sights set on North America. And so expect to see in the next 5-10 years a whole bunch of brands you've never heard of before, with a lot of cool looking, less expensive electric vehicles, to hit the market. And I fully expect them to do what Honda and Toyota did back in the 80s and sort of take over that section.
Yeah, and then there's a whole bunch of other, like Europe has a whole other set of vehicles that they offer because of the different manufacturers that only sell in Europe. So
Yeah.
they get MG still exists, but they make
MG.
they make a really amazing tiny SUV that
They're
undercuts
Chinese.
every other like even just gasoline SUV in that
Yeah.
sector. And
It's a Chinese car, the MG, built in China.
Built in China, very
Yeah.
well done, selling very well.
I mean, I don't expect,
Somebody's
so like they have Dacia, right? Dacia is a
yeah.
Romanian car company. And I don't expect them to cross the pond, just because they're, European. It's difficult for European brands to homologate outside of Europe if you're small like Dacia and you're sort of focusing on the low end. But the Chinese have the resources to just, dominate if they want to. And I think that's their goal, right? They've openly been saying that they want to dominate the electric car industry. And so it's just a matter of when that's going to happen. And I expect that to happen by the end of the decade. We'll see a whole flood of Chinese EVs. I mean, right now, like even the established brands, and I'm including Tesla in established brands here, right? They're all having trouble meeting demand, right? Demand, if you go and order a new car today, you're likely not going to get it until next year sometime, right? And that's a problem, right? Because a lot of people want EVs. I mean, look at this talk here had over 100 and some odd people, right? 150 people or something like that. And so there's a lot of interest in EVs. A lot of people want EVs and are putting down money. EVs are getting more expensive because demand is outstripping supply so badly that Tesla is actively discouraging people from buying Teslas, right? They're trying to convince people to not buy their own cars because they just can't meet demand. And so the market is ripe for a new entrant from China to come in and say, hey, you want an EV? We can give you one in 3 months or 2 months or, next week kind of thing. And I think they'd sell very well.
Great. I think we've done a really good job of answering all these questions.
Have we? Awesome.
So what we're going to do is I'll answer a couple of follow-up things here. Yes, we are going to be able to share the presentation afterwards. We do have a recording of this, which I believe we're going to publish either on the Electric Vehicle Council YouTube channel or on the city channel. I'm not sure which one we're going to land on. We also captured the information that's presented in the chats, all the back and forth we've been doing and the questions that have been posed. We're going to look to go through that as well and kind of formalize it and share it as much as we can. I'd like to again thank Mike from EVCO for bringing in such a great presentation. You guys are welcome to reach out to EVCO if you have any questions. They're very responsive in getting their answers to you guys. And they'd like nothing better than to answer any people who are really curious about getting into an EV. And just as a follow-up, while this is specifically just about EVs, we do have a couple of other presentations lined up coming up this week for some of the other programs that the city is involved with. And you can check out either from our newsletter, it has all of our events listed there, as well as on our website, the City of Ottawa climate change website, which Emma's now just posted there in the chat for you as well. I think that's everything for me. Mike, did you have any other words to sign off on, or does that cover everything?
I'm looking for the unmute button. No, I'm good. I think I have a few direct messages I'm going to have to reply to. I didn't see those until just now, so sorry if you've been waiting to get an answer from me. But yeah, no, I'm good. Thanks a lot. It's been fun.
Perfect. So thanks again, everybody, and we'll see you guys hopefully sometime soon.